So you have that dream vacation coming up. You're going to the islands and you're leaving U.S. territory. The dream vacation day comes. You go on your vacation and you come back and you get to the airport in the United States and it's utter chaos because although you're a green card holder, you trip something in the system, you get pulled to secondary inspection, and it seems like your entire life is coming to an end because you don't know if you're going to be admitted to the United States. That happens more often than we'd like to admit, and it affects people's day-to-day lives, the day-to-day lives of U.S. permanent residents who have established a life here in the United States, and their world is suddenly turned upside down. Hi there, I'm James Martin, an immigration attorney with a national practice. I'm here to help. If you have questions or would like a consultation, click on the link below. The inquiry will be sent to us, and we'll do our level best to get back to you. So the scenario I just described is happening with more frequency, unfortunately, because the Trump administration, as we all know, has taken a much harsher stance towards immigration and is seeking to ferret out what they believe are problematic people and problematic cases, and this affects permanent residents traveling outside of the United States. Let's give you a little bit of background. When you leave the United States, you are considered to be a returning permanent resident unless you stay out too long or commit a crime while outside of the United States. That's the basic rule. There are some further refinements on that rule, but you're basically supposed to be allowed back into the country. And that may still be the case or it may not be the case. And this is causing a great deal of confusion and fear amongst people who are green card holders leaving the United States. So let's break it down and let's figure out how to analyze this situation. First and foremost, I'd like to say that in the vast majority of cases, people are being allowed into the United States just like they were before. But there are certain people who need to really be on the lookout and to be very careful when they travel. Certain permanent residents do need to be very careful about traveling out of the United States and coming back. Let's take this on in terms of categories. Category 1 would be people who have past criminal records. This is a very important issue. Permanent residents can be removed from the United States for what we call pretty minor crime. A shoplifting incident, i.e. a shoplifting conviction within 5 years of being admitted as a permanent resident, can cause problems for coming into the United States. And God forbid it's 2 or 3 shoplifting incidents. So it's not enough to say, well, officer, it was just a misdemeanor, it wasn't a felony. Common sense would have it that since courts punish cases more severely based upon whether they are misdemeanors or felonies, would seem to, in the common person's mind, carry over to immigration. But immigration has a funny way of looking at crimes. And they classify crimes not based upon them being misdemeanors or felonies, but whether they are crimes involving moral turpitude. So running a traffic light is considered to be a regulatory crime. But crimes involving moral turpitude have to do with one's moral character. And roughly speaking, they go to the offenses that are listed in the religious tradition of Jews, Christians, Muslims. And so when you think about that, you think about, well, are you breaking one of the 10 commandments? Generally, this is just very general. And so if you steal from somebody or you kidnap somebody or you do something bad, that is a crime involving moral turpitude. And sometimes it's even confusing for immigration attorneys with extensive practice. And so you need to know that if you have a criminal history, even if it's an old conviction, even if it preceded you becoming a permanent resident and you think you cleared this up with the immigration service, when you became a permanent resident, it's still a good idea to review that with an immigration attorney, because it can affect you, even if it was 20 years ago, even if it was expunged, even if you paid all the fines and penalties. The crime doesn't go away just because a long time passed. And so what happens is, if it comes up on the screen of the CBP officer looking at you as a returning resident, it can cause you to be placed in secondary and held for many hours. You can lose your flight, and also it can affect whether you are permitted to even remain in the United States. So please be aware of that. The other issue that comes up is prolonged absences. Normally when you're traveling abroad, if you stay out of the United States less than 180 days, and remember what I'm saying, less than 180 days, I'm talking up to 179 days, normally they are not asking a lot of questions. That could change in the future. Normally they will just admit you because you are presumed not to have abandoned your residence. But they can ask if they believe that you have abandoned your residence and you want to have the indicia, indicators, clues, proof that you have not abandoned your legal permanent residence status. So if you're remaining outside of the United States for more than 180 days, but less than 365 days, you should be bringing with you documentation to establish the reason you've been staying out for that long, and documentation to prove that you still have the requisite ties to the United States, like that you have a car in the United States, that you're making a car payment on, that you have a house, that you have an apartment that you pay rent for, that you have all of these indicators that you have not abandoned your residence. So that is very important. And please, please, please do not stay out 1 year or more, because that is considered to be abandonment of residence, and it can cause you to truly lose your residency and spend a lot of money trying to save it in immigration court. But now let's turn to something that is a little bit more insidious, and this is what I really want you to understand. It is not just a question of whether you committed a crime, whether you were gone for a long time, absences, but it also touches upon political opinion. There are countries who will not be named here that if you say anything negative about them, particularly one on the Mediterranean coast in the Middle East, it can cause you to come under additional scrutiny, and depending upon what you say and how shrill the tone you have used on social media, you may end up in removal proceedings just for expressing that political opinion. So what am I telling you? Be very aware that if you've been politically active in activities protesting certain wars that have occurred within the last 2 years, a very prominent one, you need to be very, very careful about when you travel if you are not a permanent resident, because the government now has the ability to look into your social media feed and decide whether or not you are acting against the interest of the United States of America. And they can look in your phone, they can look on your Facebook page, they can look on your X account page, they can look at your Instagram, and all of these technologies are now being integrated. Have you ever heard of the word Palantir? Palantir is going to be one of the most important developments in our lives to date, because it is basically assisting the government. Palantir is a IT company that is integrating all of the databases so that the government can know essentially everything about you in an instant. So be very, very careful about what you say online, by what you do in demonstrations, and don't become a victim to this type of witch hunt. This information, I would say, seems to be somewhat disconcerting. At least it is to me, because this is not the America that I grew up in. We were supposed to have freedom of speech. We were supposed to have the ability to air our opinions as long as we were not advocating for violence. But it's gotten beyond that at this point. So you need to be aware that the government is watching you. If you have been involved in any political activities over the last few years that would seem contrary to what the government presently likes, be very careful and consult a legal professional before traveling. If you have any criminal history in your past, even though you think it's resolved, consult with a legal professional. And be very, very aware of what prolonged absences can do to you and how they can affect you. If you're interested, click on the link below. We are here to help, and we will try to help you in any way that we can. Here's wishing you the very best.